Time now for this week's shopping stat. What's happening in Iran is courageous on a profound level. It's the biggest threat to the ruling mullahs in Iran in a decade, as hundreds of thousands of protesters, as you know, have taken to the street throughout the country to demand an end to the authoritarian regime. Sadly, Canada's government has mustered up only what I'd call lukewarm boilerplate in support of the protesters. In what could have been my goofy Liberal MP, Majid Jawari, called the Islamic regime an elected government. Well, sure, elected in the same way that Hugo Chavez or Saddam Hussein or Fidel Castro were all elected. What a joke. If the world was looking for any leadership from Canada, you know, as the Prime Minister is fond of saying, Canada's back. Well, we're back, but only for photo ops. Not for a principled defense of freedom and democracy in Iran, a country that publicly hangs gays. Maybe we should hear something from the LGBT community. Maybe they'll pat the Peel on the back for his silence. I don't know. But where is the support is my point. The Iranian regime imprison human rights activists. They rape women in prison. But we cringe and take a back seat to the brightest light in the U.S. administration. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley says, in quotes, "It takes great bravery for the Iranian people to use the power of their voice against their government, especially when that government has a long history of murdering its own people who dare to speak the truth. All freedom-loving people must stand with their cause," end of quote. Well, the reports have what, 22 people dead, over 1,000 imprisoned? And the Canadian government seems to get very uncomfortable, if not outright disagreeing with Nikki Haley's declaration that human rights are not the gift of government, but the inalienable right of these people themselves. It's a good bet that she didn't applaud Fidel Castro after his death. As you can tell, I find the lack of support for the protesters unfathomable, given that a democratic, modern Iran would be the most positive step in the Middle East in decades. And just before I get to the shocking stat, I also want to put the spotlight on the prominent feminist groups throughout Canada, the U.S., and Europe, who seem to remain silent despite the fact that Iranian women are risking their lives to take on the regime. They're not wearing their hijabs or niqabs. They're declaring that the state won't dictate what they wear, who they talk to, what they say. And major feminist groups have nothing to say. They turn their back on them, very much the same way President Barack Obama did in 2009 in his now famous Just Say No to Freedom and Democracy nuclear deal with the mullahs, which, by the way, is a big motivator for our own federal government, who, despite the murder and imprisonment of today's protesters, whose crime is they just want basic freedoms, our government is ignoring the protesters because they're committed to restoring relations with the mullahs. If that's not shocking enough, let me share one stat that may explain the spontaneity of the protests, despite what many are saying is a lack of leadership. The 2009 protests, there was only an estimated 1 million smartphones in Iran. But today, 48 million, all able to message, organize, and get the word out. For those who don't think that economics are important, and I know that's a huge group out there, when it comes to the Iranian protesters' demand to remove the shackles of the authoritarian mullahs, there's a heck of a lot to do with economics. Think about this. 10 years ago, Iran's unemployment was 11.9%. Today it's slightly higher, 12.6%. In 2009, it took 10,000 rials to buy $1 US. Today it takes 35,000. That's enough. Well, I think we should be helping.